The Hardie Boys are many things to the people of Martinaise. The militant arm of the Dock Workers Union, a gang of self-professed killers, a substitute to local law enforcement, and a bunch of beer-drinking hooligans. Few characters in Disco Elysium wear more hats than the Hardie Boys, both in the community and in the narrative. Early on, they're an obstacle to Harry's investigation, stonewalling his attempts to solve the murder by taking false responsibility for Ledley's death. But after some effective questioning, they become a tremendous source of information, providing Harry with some of his best leads in the case. And by the end of the game, they become Harry's brothers in arms, joining him in a battle in the streets against the Crenell mercenaries. In Disco Elysium, the Hardie Boys are a vehicle through which we can understand the developer's nuanced portrayal of unions, and a lens through which we can see the positive, transformative impact Harry can have on the people of Martinaise. But before I go on, if you are a Disco Elysium fan, then please be sure to like, subscribe, and consider supporting me with a YouTube channel membership or over on Patreon. Just like Harry, I'm hoping to leave the world of teaching and focus on these videos full-time someday. And by doing any of those things, you'll be helping make that dream a reality. During the first day of the investigation, you will inevitably hear about the Hardie Boys from a variety of sources around Martinaise. You'll hear about how they're lackeys for Everard Clare, the comically corrupt, overgrown weasel at the head of the Dock Workers Union, his band of thugs, and the closest thing that the district has to a form of law enforcement. But most importantly, they've taken credit for the murder of the hanged man, making them prime suspects in the investigation. The group has 7 members. They're led by Titus, a mountain of a man, a former prize fighter, and a fan of local athletics, namely rugby and rowing. His second in command is Eugene, known for abstaining from alcohol and playing the guitar, something Titus recruited him to do to boost morale. Theo is the group's former leader, who doesn't say much, but when he does, the group hangs on his every word. Glenn is Titus's best friend, a fellow fan of rugby, and according to Empathy, he's secretly gay. Rounding out the group is Elaine, a tattooed man from Mesk, Shanky, a mean-faced, rat-like man whose nickname speaks for itself, and Angus, who handles the group's radio equipment. There's also Ruby, but because we never see her directly interact with the rest of the group, I'm not going to include her with the main members for the sake of this video. On day 2, Harry will have the chance to interview them, as they'll take up residence in a private section of the Whirling in Rags. Whether or not it's advantageous to do so at this point depends on how far along you are in your investigation, as you might still be trying to figure out how to take down the corpse of the hanged man, or trying to understand what the hell happened to Harry's brain with the help of resident encyclopedia Joyce Messer. Regardless, whether your Harry is a true can opener or a meandering hobo cop, you will eventually need to speak with the Hardie Boys. Talking with them serves as a bit of a funnel point for the investigation as a whole. After laying out so many threads and potential leads on day 1, at some point, talking with Titus and company becomes the only way forward. Unlike Kuno, who we discussed last time I covered Disco Elysium, the Hardie Boys are an incredible source of information on the case. Once Harry's done his thing and opened them up like a can of Revachol ravioli. It takes some time to break through. Between the presence of the Union lawyer and their insistence that they killed Lely, they put up a respectable defense. But once the cracks begin to show, they start singing loud and clear, becoming Harry's best witnesses in the case. It's one of my favorite segments of the game, as it really shows how good Harry is at his job. He really does shatter their walls, and not through sheer force or simple threats. That's not an option here. He has to work them, find the flaws in their story, the flaws in their group dynamic, and expose them through a mixture of persuasion, intimidation, and deduction. After watching Harry wake up in his underwear and struggle to face his own reflection, it is incredible to see him question the Hardie Boys with all the talent of Dick Mullen. Like watching Geralt track down a monster and prepare to fight it like a true professional, detective work is Harry's element, and the game demonstrates it clearly when he breaks the Hardie Boys. Anyway, the Hardies will admit to Harry that they didn't kill Lely, tell him everything they remember about the night of the murder, and point him in the direction of Classia and Ruby. It doesn't matter that Titus tries to protect Classia, if you can even call his idle threats protection. He still gives Harry enough information to proceed with the case. And proceed he does. Following his interrogation of the Hardie boys, Harry can move on to investigating Glacia and searching the coast for Ruby, two significant checkpoints that bring the case closer to its conclusion. But it's at the height of the game's action, during the Mercenary Tribunal, that we really see what the Hardie boys are made of. This level is so damn good. Honestly, it might be my favorite in all of video games. The countless ways it can end, the number of people who can get injured or die, the many tools Harry can use to fight back, and how Harry can deploy all of the information he's gathered so far to try and get Raoul out of his element come together to make a segment that is wildly different on every playthrough, yet immensely satisfying at the same time. It's a beautiful marriage of writing and game design, and at some point, I'm going to look at this fantastic moment itself in greater detail. But for now, let's just focus on the Hardies. It goes unnoticed, as the focus here is on Harry and his heroics, but the Hardies, in the majority of scenarios, do an admirable job here. So long as Harry wins the encounter, which I define as taking down Raoul with the spirit bomb or his pepper box, and then handing his firearm to Kim when the moment calls for it, Titus and the surviving Hardies will attack Rude, the crazy mercenary who sounds like a reject from a death metal band. They'll strip him of his armor and beat him to death, thereby ensuring that all three of the rogue Crenel agents die on the streets of Martinaise. But no matter the outcome, the group does suffer some losses. Titus will meet his end if Raoul isn't taken out. Shanky will run as certain dialogue options are chosen, and die if he stays. Glenn, Angus, and Theo always die, meaning that only Elaine and Eugene have plot armor. No matter who survives, the group will always have a profound respect for Harry for his actions during the tribunal. They'll show this when Harry wakes up in the whirling in rags after spending several days on the mend, and returns to their private room in the cafe. But if you ask me, this moment is best if Harry uses the spirit bomb and Titus survives. He'll earn a ton of praise from the big man for his use of improvised explosives. It's so cool to see Titus, who's pretty resistant to Harry at the start, come full circle with the hobo cop here at the end. And finally, if the right conditions have been met, Harry can recommend that Titus join the RCM himself someday, an offer that the big man, fortunately for Martinaise, says he will consider. When analyzing our encounters with the Hardie boys, several things stand out to me. First, let's talk about the way they're portrayed. I'm an American, so my experiences with democratic socialism and unions has been colored by the way things are here in the States. But everything about the Hardie boys, from their blue-collar aesthetic to their beer-swigging antics, and especially their rough-and-tumble attitude, flies in the face of the way socialists and union members are depicted in most of our media. They're usually drawn up as short, nerdy, and weak. As a short, nerdy member of a teachers' union myself, there's nothing inherently wrong with this. But it's a stereotype that simply isn't true in the grand scheme of things. Over the last few years, many blue-collar unions, such as the Auto Workers Union and the John Deere Workers Union, earn national media attention for their strikes. And the men and women in those unions have a lot more in common with the Hardie boys demographically than the stereotype. A lot has been written about Disco Elysium's pro-socialist, pro-union messaging, and the way the developers designed the Hardie boys might be the clearest example of this. They're also a nod to the game's unconventional depiction of police work. We see this quite clearly with the RCM itself. During the Mercenary Tribunal, Harry and Kim are hopelessly, hilariously outgunned by Raoul and his cohorts. As someone from the States, this is shocking. Not the firepower on Crenel's side, but the lack of it on the RCM's. Crenel is fighting this battle with semi-automatic weapons. Meanwhile, Harry and Kim are equipped with breech-loading weapons. Breech-loading weapons, like you'd see over in Greedfall! Here in America, there are police departments that have access to tanks. Tanks! Others have all kinds of high-powered weaponry. All of this is to say that Disco Elysium's portrayal of the police is far from conventional. And the same is true of the Hardie boys. As mentioned throughout the game, and especially early on, the Hardie boys are, essentially, the closest thing Martinaise has to a true police force. They're the ones who take care of issues in the district, or as Titus says following the incident with pigs, they take care of their own. I wouldn't call them effective, and they're certainly far from ethical. But still, they remain an example of the unconventional ways Disco Elysium portrays police work. This is part of why Harry's pitch to Titus after the tribunal, where he recommends that he become a tried and true member of the RCM, is so important, as it helps to drive home the game's atypical depiction of such a well-known career. But from a narrative perspective, the arc of the Hardie Boys helps to demonstrate the positive, community-aiding work that Harry does during his 2 weeks in Martinaise. As I discussed earlier, the Hardie Boys initially stonewall Harry. They insult him and Kim, give them the runaround, keep up their lies about the murder until Angus breaks down, and yet, by the end of the game, they've come to really respect Harry. In many ways, the Hardie Boys aren't just a representation of the dockworkers union, but Martinaise as a whole. By earning their trust and appreciation, the developers are showing us that everyone in the orphaned district has come around on Harry as well. And that's a big thing, considering that before we even fire up the game, Harry has crashed his motor carriage, trashed his room at the Whirling in Rags, and harassed a bartender until she quit her job. Everyone in Martinaise has a good reason to hate Harry, but thanks to his hard work on the case, the Hardie Boys make it quite clear that they don't. Due to the court case involving Zaum, Robert Kurvitz, and the game's other lead developers, I am unfortunately skeptical that we'll ever get to see a Disco Elysium 2, at least one that will be accepted by the community. But if we did, I'd want to see a version of Harry that has taken some measure of pride in the work he did in Martinaise. A Harry who looks forward to returning to the orphaned district when the calls come in, due in large part to his positive rapport with the Hardie Boys. And that's what makes the Hardie Boys so important to Disco Elysium. Thanks for watching. Huge shout out to my Disco Elysium collaborator Isla Sound for allowing me to use her fan music for these videos. To check out all of her music, just follow the link down in the description box. Huge thanks to my Silver and Gold tier channel members James Pruitt, Raven Lampkin, and Corey Madsen, who receive early access to these videos and more thanks to donations of $5 to $10 a month. Next time I cover Disco Elysium, I'll be taking a look at the mysterious and elusive Colossia. But next week, it's back into the world of Night in the Woods, so we can get a deeper understanding of the Black Goat. See you guys then!